When the Waters Rose, Flood Myths Around the World, Part 1. There is a tempting way to begin an episode about flood myths. You gather stories from Mesopotamia, Greece, India, China, the Americas, the Pacific, and the mountains. You place them side by side. You point to the water, the warning, the survivor, the boat, the mountain, the new beginning. And then you say, surely all of these stories must remember the same event. It is a powerful idea. It is also too simple. Flood stories do appear again and again across the world. That much is true, but they do not all say the same thing. They do not come from the same periods. They do not all preserve the same kind of memory. Some are sacred histories, some are literary relatives, some are moral warnings, some are memories of river valleys, coastlines, tsunamis, storms, or glacial lakes. Some were reshaped by scribes, priests, poets, colonial collectors, translators, and modern popular imagination. The honest question is not which one is the real flood. The better question is, what kind of memory is each tradition preserving? Water is one of the oldest human fears, because water is one of the oldest human necessities. Civilizations grow beside rivers, lakes, deltas, and coastlines. The same water that makes fields fertile can erase fields overnight. The same sea that carries trade can return as storm surge. The same river that marks a boundary can change its course and swallow a settlement. So it should not surprise us that human beings tell stories about water rising. What matters is how each story explains the rising. In Mesopotamia, the flood story belongs to a river world. The Tigris and Euphrates made agriculture possible, but they were not gentle symbols. They could shift, inundate, and destroy. Cuneiform traditions such as Atrahasis, the Sumerian flood story, and the flood episode in the Epic of Gilgamesh preserve a cluster of related motifs: divine decision, warning to a chosen survivor, construction of a vessel, preservation of life, birds released after the waters, sacrifice after survival, and a changed relationship between gods and humans. Those Mesopotamian stories matter because they are among the earliest surviving flood narratives we can read in writing. They show that long before the familiar biblical version of Noah reached later readers, ancient Near Eastern scribes were already thinking about flood as catastrophe, judgment, noise, population, divine regret, and the fragile survival of life. Genesis belongs to that same broader ancient Near Eastern conversation, but it is not simply a copy pasted into another book. It reshapes the inherited flood pattern through its own theology: covenant, righteousness, divine judgment, preservation, and the sign of the rainbow. That is our first caution. Some flood stories really are literally related, or at least part of a shared ancient regional tradition, but that does not mean all flood stories everywhere are versions of the same story. If we move to Greece, the story changes. In the Deucalion tradition, Zeus sends a flood to destroy a corrupt generation. Deucalion and Pyrrha survive in a chest or vessel, come to rest on a mountain, and repopulate the earth in a strange symbolic way by throwing stones behind them, which become human beings. The story has punishment, survival, mountain refuge, and renewed humanity, but its emotional grammar is Greek. The stones matter, the ancestry matters, the renewed people are tied to the land itself. If we move to India, the story changes again. In the tradition of Manu, a small fish asks for protection. Manu saves it as it grows larger and larger until the fish warns him that a flood is coming. Manu builds a boat. When the waters rise, the fish guides the vessel to safety, often to a mountain. In later Hindu developments, the fish becomes associated with Matsya, an avatar of Vishnu. Here, the flood is not just catastrophe, it is also revelation, protection, cosmic transition, and the preservation of order through a relationship between the human survivor and a divine guide. Then China gives us a very different pattern. The legends of Gun and Yu are not mainly about a family in an ark surviving the end of the world. They are about controlling water. Gun tries to dam the flood and fails. U succeeds through long labor, dredging, channels and outlets to the sea. U becomes the tamer of the flood and, in later tradition, a founding figure of political order. That difference matters. Not every flood myth is about escape. Some are about engineering, some are about kingship, some are about the legitimacy of rule because someone made the world habitable again. When modern lists flatten all these traditions into many versions of Noah, they erase the local meaning of the stories. They turn Greek stones, Indian fish, Chinese dredging, Mesopotamian tablets, and indigenous coastal hazard memory into one oversimplified chart. That may feel satisfying for a moment, but it makes the past smaller. The world's flood stories are not powerful because they are identical. They are powerful because water gives many cultures a language for the same human terror. The world you depend on can become the thing that destroys you. When the Waters Rose, Flood Myths Around the World, Part 2. Once we stop forcing every flood story into one mold, the evidence becomes more interesting. Some flood traditions may preserve literary inheritance, others may preserve local experience, others may preserve moral or theological reflection, and some may preserve memories of real environmental events, but only if we handle that claim carefully. This is where geology enters the story. Floods leave traces, rivers leave terraces and sediment, tsunamis leave sand sheets. Glacial lakes can burst through natural dams and carve scars into landscapes. Coastlines can sink, rise, or be reshaped by earthquakes. In some places, oral traditions may preserve memories of disasters that were also recorded by the earth. One of the most careful modern examples comes from the Pacific Northwest. Along the Cascadia subduction zone, indigenous oral traditions recorded by outsiders describe shaking, ocean withdrawal, flooding, canoes, high ground, loss of life, and relocation. Geological research has shown that the Cascadia megathrust produced a major earthquake and tsunami in the year 1700. Japanese records of an orphan tsunami also help confirm the event. This does not mean we should grab those traditions and reduce them to data points. They belong to living peoples and specific communities. They have cultural meanings beyond geological reconstruction, but they remind us that oral tradition can preserve disaster memory, especially when the event transforms a coastline, destroys villages, or becomes a warning for future generations. That is one honest way myth and history can overlap. Not because every flood story is the same flood, because real floods happen and human beings remember them through the forms their cultures use. A river community may tell a river story, a coastal community may tell a wave story, a mountain community may remember a lake, a landslide, or a sudden release of water. A palace civilization may turn flood into divine judgment and social order. A theological tradition may turn flood into covenant. A royal tradition may turn flood control into the origin of kingship. A poetic tradition may make the survivor the ancestor of a renewed human world. The danger comes when modern interpreters overreach. It is easy to say that hundreds of flood myths prove a single global deluge, but that claim usually ignores chronology, geography, source quality, translation history, and the fact that floods are common human experiences. Similar motifs can arise independently because people everywhere know what water can do. It is also easy to say that because some modern claims are exaggerated, all flood traditions are worthless as memory. That is also wrong. The better path is slower. Ask where the story was recorded. Ask how old the source is. Ask whether it belongs to an oral tradition, a sacred text, a mythographic collection, a colonial report, a modern paraphrase, or a later religious retelling. Ask what the flood means inside that culture. Ask whether there is local geology that might match the scale and shape of the story. Ask whether the story is about punishment, survival, renewal, kingship, water control, ancestor memory, or sacred relationship, and then resist the urge to make every answer the same. Flood myths feel universal because water is universal, but universality is not sameness. A Mesopotamian scribe copying a tablet, a Greek mythographer retelling Deucalion, an Indian tradition remembering Manu and the fish, a Chinese legend honoring Yu's flood control, and a Pacific Northwest community preserving tsunami memory are not all doing one thing. They are all responding to water, and water is never only physical, it is fear, it is cleansing, it is punishment, it is fertility, it is chaos, it is trade, it is travel, it is boundary, it is memory, it is the thing that gives life and the thing that can take life away without warning. That is why flood stories survive. They help people speak about vulnerability on a scale too large for ordinary language. They turn catastrophe into narrative. They turn survival into responsibility. They turn landscape into warning. And sometimes, if we are careful, they preserve echoes of real events, not as exact reports, but as cultural memory shaped by fear, meaning, and time. So when the waters rise in myth after myth, we should not rush to one answer. We should listen for the differences, because the differences tell us what each culture feared, what it valued, what it thought had gone wrong, and what it believed had to survive. In that sense, the world's flood myths do not point to one drowned world. They point to many human worlds, each standing at the edge of water, trying to remember what happened when the boundary broke. And that may be the deeper truth. The flood is not only a story about the past, it is a story about how fragile the present has always been.